Welcome to Missing the Mark, where we look for meaning in strange places. I'm Christopher. Ash Wednesday is a very interesting day. For those unfamiliar, it's the first day of Lent, which is the 40-day preparation for Easter. Within the church, celebrations are generally speaking preceded by some amount of fast. In both cases, some sort of preparation. In any event, fasting, abstinence from meat, etc., being popular things. The idea basically being that both a feast and a fast, using fast a little symbolically here, are both unsustainable things, where they're actually used in a sense not precisely to counterbalance each other, although there is even an element of that, but where you do an unsustainable amount of penance concentrated so that you really notice it. You can really pay attention to it, and it's not simply one of those things that sort of fades into the background as normal. And then having done penance, and moreover, many of these spiritual exercises within Lent being things of preparation of self-control in particular. Fasting, abstinence from meat, all of these things are cases where you are refraining from something that is good because you can temporarily do without it, in order to gain control of yourself so that when you do choose to partake of the good thing, you do so in command of yourself, voluntarily, not as a slave to your passions. So this prepares you for the Feast of Easter, the great celebration, and within the church's calendar, feasts last longer than the preparatory fasts. So the season of Easter lasts longer than the season of Lent, marking off at Pentecost, which is 50 days, Lent being 40 days, and then the Easter season being 50 days. You can see it very clearly. And so again, you do something which is unsustainable. You can't feast forever. You can't celebrate forever, because then that would just be normal, and you wouldn't notice it. So again, by concentrating this, you notice it. And in a fallen world, you need that sort of help to concentrate things so that you notice them. So there's a bunch of stuff I said about Ash Wednesday in a previous video, and this is sort of a not exactly continuation, but more thoughts on the subject, not talking about the stuff I already talked about. But I'd like to talk about the topic of death, which is introduced by what is said when the ashes are imposed on the forehead, which is, I like the variant, "Remember, O man, you are dust, and to dust you will return." That there is a certain sense, the memento mori is a very useful thing, but there is also a sense in which it is a happy thing. I always loved the line in the very beginning, because I haven't read much of the rest of The Lord of the Rings, when it was listing off the different quantities of rings given to various people, and one of them was 9 for the mortal men doomed to die. And the thing about that is that I'm not too sure of Lord of the Rings. In other contexts, human beings were always a bit special within that sort of fantasy setting, where other species would be better than humans in some way, but humans always had a curious sort of balance. And within Tolkien, for example, the elves were not doomed to die. The elves were immortal, and I don't know about the dwarves. I believe they were long-lived, but human beings were very different in that we were doomed to die in a relatively short period of time. And this is also a very interesting theme if you're into fantasy in the Dragonlance Chronicles and the Legends. I'm thinking particular stuff in the Chronicles, and I know some people say it's because it's also here because it's a ripoff of The Lord of the Rings, and in some sense that's true, but, mediocrity borrows and genius steals, and the Chronicles were quite good, and the Legends were even better. So yes, they stole from Tolkien, but they did it proud by actually doing something with what they stole. And so there's an interesting part where some dwarves and humans, and dwarves and elves and half-elf were reflecting on just how short-lived human beings are. Oh, I'm sorry, and dragons, that was the big one, because within Dragonlance, elves live for something like 1,000 years, and dragons live for tens of thousands of years. And so a dragon was reflecting on just how, an elf doesn't live very long in their estimation, and a human's just sort of a brief flicker, but somehow this makes humans special because they actually try really hard because they have so little time. So they're interesting, practical elements to remembering death and death, keeping this in mind. But there's an even something of a happy element to it, given the qualification that we're talking about a fallen world, because an unfallen world would, of course, be better than a fallen world. But given that we're in a fallen world, given the world as you find it, if you just open your eyes and look around, The fact that we are doomed to die is actually something of a happy fact, because this world is one in which true happiness is clearly not possible. Not within the confines of the world as it is now. There's the Christian promise of the world to come, that where God will restore things, and this is where us being doomed to die is, in fact, a happy fact, because it leaves open the possibility of things becoming better, of there being a better world than this, where this world can be remade into something better than it is now. Because if you took this world as it is and simply extended it forever, and let's ignore entropy, let's ignore stars running out of fuel, and ignore big crunches, because the big crunch looks, I believe, pretty unlikely. But big crunch being all the mass of the universe pulling itself back together again into, slamming together. And from what I understand, that's looking fairly unlikely at this point, given cosmic expansion. So, ignore all that, though. Just set aside everything where the world is running, irreversibly running down, and assume somehow or other you could continue powering it, that somehow you could, within this, manage to continually inject new energy into the system so that it wasn't all continuously running down. You could somehow reverse entropy so that it wasn't, inevitably breaking down. Okay. So if you make all those assumptions, which just for the sake of thought of experiment, because you can't actually do these things, this would still not be a world in which true happiness is possible. And a good place to see this, actually, is in criticisms made by by atheists of this sort of vision of heaven you find amongst really Christian fundamentalists, but anyone who takes religious art too seriously and looks up, too literally is really what I mean, and looks up and sees the pictures of the saints feasting at a table, and looks over there and sees pictures of the sinners being continually prodded with sharp things by demons in the midst of flames which never burn them. So, it can't feel all that hot given that they're never burned. And, all the sharp things poke them continually, but, they're still there to be poked. It's a topic I've mentioned a bunch. But it's highly relevant here. That if you continue this, it simply doesn't work. That you can't poke somebody with sharp things forever and expect that to continue being possible. Either you're not doing enough damage that, to matter, or you are, in which case you won't be able to continue to poke them with sharp things because they will have fallen apart. You can't continue to damage something forever. You can't continue to damage something within time, without end, and either be doing something or not have an endpoint. Mathematically speaking, this because you can't sum a positive number infinitely and get something that is finite. If you sum a positive constant infinitely many times, you will you get an infinite quantity, which is to say it doesn't converge to any particular number, because there's infinity is not a number. And if anyone wants to throw in the idea that you could, every poke is half as hard as the previous poke, and thus you could actually sum to a finite quantity, the obvious problem with this is at some point the pokes are going to be so gentle you don't notice them. And although this is a little bit of geekery right there, it nonetheless makes the point that even if you try to get hyper-technical, even if you try to push things and be as creative in a sort of nerdy sense as you want, it still doesn't work. There's no way to make that sort of torture bad in time unendingly. In the same sort of way, there is no way to make that feast good forever. You can't keep eating and not be full. But if the food doesn't fill you, you don't get the pleasure of being filled. Further, further on that exact point, that as you taste the food, you get used to the taste of the food. It can't, you can't continually have it taste good and not become used to the taste. Anyone who doubts this should just eat dinner with Greeks, because at some point you get sick of all the food. At least on the Greek side of my family, we generally have enough food to feed everybody to complete full stuffedness about twice over, and then you have, roughly speaking, 1 to 1.5 pies per person for dessert. And that's after all the stuff you've been eating beforehand. At least my experience of the Greek side of my family is we love to feed people. We really, really like to feed people. And when you have everybody at a family get-together who all likes to feed people, man, is there a lot of food. When you're in the modern food, food surplus sort of environment. Anyway, anyone who's got an experience anything like that, though, because I think this extends pretty far past Greek, knows that if you keep on eating for a long, long time, you get bored of it, you get sick of it, you get tired of it. Even if even if by some miracle you could somehow like have the food constantly just disappearing from inside your belly, you'd get bored of this. And the criticism I alluded to earlier of the atheists who criticize fundamentalist Christians and anyone else who takes this sort of art too seriously, is they point out that, like, well, this would be boring. Heaven, in this sort of sense, would be boring, because you're not really doing much of anything. And in this limited sense in which they are taking, metaphorical art far, far too literally, yeah, you would. You'd get tired of this. Every human depiction of heaven is going to look boring, because every human depiction of heaven is something, it's representational from the things in this world, and it's just sort of showing them extended. Okay, what this criticism often misses is that hell would be even more boring, because, if you don't believe me, spend some time around, spend time around an alcoholic, spend time around somebody who's high on marijuana constantly, and they're incredibly, incredibly boring people. Astonishingly boring people. It's actually one of those things, because I went to college, so I knew a few people who smoked a lot of marijuana, not very well. And man, are they incredibly boring. They have nothing to say. They're often surprisingly impressed with themselves, but man, do they bore everybody else. So that part of the criticism doesn't work. I want to go to hell because that's where the good parties are. No, it's not. And I'm not even talking about good theology. I just mean, find the sort of people who think that hell is where the good parties are, and I can pretty much guarantee you they throw bad parties here on earth. Like they throw good parties only if you take enough intoxicants to, produce the essentially hallucination that what's going on is a good time. But, actually go to some of these people's, like, real life parties sober, with your judgment and your faculties still intact, not chemically numbed down tremendously. And they don't throw good parties now. So this shows, I think, and if you think about it, because I'm just kind of sketching where to look, like, if you spend a little time thinking about this world just extended without end, how incredibly boring and uninteresting this would get. And I know those, no, I'd always be learning new things. Well, for one thing, you'll be forgetting new things. And at some point, the knowledge that you're going to forget everything that you're learning is going to put a little bit of a damper on how exciting it is to learn new things. But the other thing is, talk to people in their 90s. See how much they, are just, continually, intrigued by learning new things. And some of them, will be interested to, keep on picking up hobbies. That does happen. Not everybody loses the energy for hobbies. But, the thing is, after a while, you actually learn a lot, and especially when it comes to human beings, you start noticing that old saying that there's nothing new under the sun, that everything keeps on repeating itself. And that's not to say that there's nothing to learn, because, you can always take up each new hobby. There are an astonishingly large number of animals you could, spend time studying, for example. So I don't mean you literally couldn't learn anything, but the thing is, how radically different is the 10,731st salamander from the 10,730th salamander? I should throw in the little qualification that happiness must necessarily consist of the ability to appreciate something you've already appreciated. So, I don't mean to focus on novelty as the only possible source of happiness. At the same time, the world as it is, we're not really any good at appreciating things without novelty. And moreover, the world as it is constructed is overly hidden. This is getting a little bit less superficial. The problem is that everything in this world points to other things, but nothing in this world really is very much itself. And this has to do with being in time, the way it's moving along, where everything is, where we can't get at the future, as St. Augustine pointed. We can't bring back the past except through our memories. We can't touch the past. We can't do anything with the future except guess at it. The moment is razor thin. And so, as such, with everything constantly in flux, nothing is really truly itself. So it's not possible to appreciate things as they are, because the as they are is in flux, the way things sort of currently are. This is where you get a great deal of variants of nihilism. You see some of this in Eastern philosophy, some of this in ancient Greek philosophy. Was it Anaximander who said that everything is flux? Or is Heraclitus? Eve Canon's going to be screaming at her monitor when she sees this. I can't remember who it is who said that everything is flux, but, nothing really is. And that's not true, but the thing is, the reason it's not true is because there's more to this world than this world. And that, too, is the hope that death brings. That this world is not complete, that this world will end. And the fact that this world will end means there is the possibility that a new world will begin that does something with this world more permanent, more real than this world. So, I do understand this one's been kind of long and rambly, but that is, I think, the great hope in Ash Wednesday, that Ash Wednesday, within the Christian calendar, obviously, Ash Wednesday is the preparation for Easter. So, we know what we're hoping for in particular. But even apart from that, even if you don't quite know what you're hoping for, or even if you don't know at all what you're hoping for, death does still open up that door of hope. Now, things could end badly. The whole world could kind of come to nothing. But here's kind of the curious thing about that. And I think a reason why there is hope, even if you don't know what you're hoping for. So I'm talking outside of a Christian context, and that is that great phrase, ex nihilo nihil fit. Out of nothing comes nothing. From nothing comes nothing. But the curious thing is, if you look at it and flip it around slightly, nothing comes from nothing. Which also kind of means that if this world is going into nothing, that's not quite right. Because nothing comes from nothing, but this world isn't nothing. So it kind of suggests, it doesn't prove, I want to be clear on that, it's not a logical necessity, but it really suggests that this world is not becoming nothing. Because nothing comes from nothing, it doesn't come from something. At least ordinarily. Anyway, as I said, that's not a proof of anything. That is not a logical inference. It's just suggestive. But I think that is a reason why all human beings have some instinct of hope. This world clearly is not nothing, so it really shouldn't be turning into nothing. Until next time, may you hit everything you aim at.